welcome all. We've been waiting for this training for some time. I can't remember when we first started planning it or putting it on our agenda, but it was quite a while ago. And so here we are, February 3rd, and it's great to have you all gathered with us this morning. We have liaisons from Canadian Shield and from Shining Waters together here. I think roughly equal number from both regions. And so we're going to have an opportunity to get to know each other in a second when we do some introductions. I just want to start by identifying those of us who are going to be facilitating. And that is my colleague Todd in Shining Waters and my colleague Rob from Canadian Shield. So here we are, the three of us. We recognize that on the face of it, the three of us are three white males leading this training on equity and diversity. And so, but that's, we were hired and we're glad we have our jobs. On the other hand, we are diverse as well. I mean, there are elements of diversity. One of us is gay, one of us is lay, one of us has a queer child, and there are other things that obviously differentiate us. But there are many ways to look at diversity, obviously, and the training might have a different flavor if the composition of the facilitators was different. But this is who we are, and we're happy to be here with you today. And we hope that we will be able to lead you into new insights and new explorations of issues of equity and how to do that with our search teams. I also want to acknowledge this morning that February is Black History Month. And so we are celebrating our Black ministers, our Black lay people, and all Black people in our country. And we celebrate their history, and we acknowledge the challenges and equity issues and oppression that Black peoples have faced as well, not only in Canada, but all over the world. And so we will keep that in mind as we move through these 2 days. Well, we would love to be in, well, actually, before I do that, I just want to maybe take a little bit more time for Todd and Rob and I to introduce ourselves. So I am one of the two pastoral relations ministers in Shining Waters. My home congregation is East End United, and full disclosure, Dan Benson, who is here, is my minister, and that is my home congregation. I am actually coming to you from just north of Kingston, Ontario this morning, so I'm just going to ask Todd and Rob to also introduce themselves briefly. Go ahead, Todd.
Okay. So I'm Todd McDonald. Been an ordained minister for the last 32 years. I am coming to you from Barrie. My home church is Burton Avenue United Church, and Isla Scott and I both attend Burton Avenue. And so really thrilled to be with you this morning. So over to Rob.
Great. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Dale. My name's Rob Smith, and I am the Pastoral Relations Minister for Canadian Shield. I'm sort of in my second year of this task, and I come to you from Thunder Bay. It's interesting, the home church. I mean, I'm connected loosely with First Wesley United in Thunder Bay, and I have been ordained coming up onto 15 years as a United Church minister. I began ministry in the United Methodist Church 34 years ago, which seems like a lifetime ago. Anyways, and I have two cats. Hopefully you will not meet them during the course of today. They're Rusty and Yoda, and they came to me in my settlement charge on the west coast of BC a little indigenous village called Bella Coola, and they've traveled with me for 15 years and are still healthy and strong. So there's my introduction. So over to you. I'm not sure who's taking over now.
Back to me. Thanks,
Okay,
Rob.
back to you.
Yeah, so we would love to be in this meeting together in one place. We know that's not possible in the times that we live in, but we are here from Thunder Bay to maybe I'm the furthest east here in Kingston, but we come from a wide range of places, and so we want to begin by acknowledging that there were inhabitants and stewards of this land before our parents, before our grandparents, our ancestors and other settlers came to Canada. Here where I am this morning, I acknowledge the historical and ongoing presence of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. And I invite you to just acknowledge silently, or if you wish in the chat, however you wish, the Indigenous peoples on the land where you find yourselves this morning. And as we begin a gathering dedicated to issues of equity, we acknowledge the enormous harm to Indigenous peoples that accompanied the settlement of Canada. And may we renew our commitment to address these injustices with Indigenous peoples' commitment that involves a lifelong journey of learning, of listening, of understanding, and of acting. And may that journey continue for all of us, and may it be so. I invite Todd to talk to us with us about the purpose of this meeting. Todd.
There we go. I am unmuted. Good morning, everyone. So today, again, so glad that you have chosen to be here. We have almost 100% of our folk here. We are recording this so that there will be an opportunity for people not here to be able to participate that way. I just saw Lynella come in, so that's great. Lynella was, I was just looking for Lynella. It's great. She's here. Today, we have two focus. The focus today, one of the things that we heard in our in some research from you, we heard that it's part of the struggle that you have as liaisons is to recognize your own bias and then expect to train other people to understand their bias. And so we really want to do some work today on our own bias that we all have, and it's natural to have. And so we can't get out of having bias, but we could be very intentional to look at our bias and to be aware, self-aware. So we're going to do some of that work today. And that's going to be our work today. And then tomorrow, we're going to then say, okay, you're the trainers of people to look at their own bias. You're going to be doing equity training. So tomorrow is going to be turning around and saying, okay, we want to do some work with you to be trainers of equity in the with the search team. So today is our own, and tomorrow is how do we become trainers. Some of you have worked a long time as liaison, and so hopefully it'll be an enhancement to your own work as liaisons, and some of you are new. So we welcome both our long-term liaisons and our new liaisons. And I'm just going to turn it over to Rob now.
Great, thank you, Todd. And now we just want to kind of put you into small groups. We've been intentional about the small groups, hoping to kind of get a chance for you to mingle with your counterparts in the other regions. So, and I'm going to put into the chat
Rob, you somehow muted yourself. There you go.
Somehow I'm trying to put all of that into there. Okay, so your name, where you're from, how long you've been working at this, and just as a conversation, a time when you felt like you were an outsider. And so there are groups of 4. So we're going to give you about 12 minutes. And so just a reminder that each person gets, I say 4 minutes there, you actually get 3 minutes. So any questions? If not, I'll let Dale do the mystery, the magic of breakout rooms.
Yeah. Welcome back, everybody. We're just going to take a few minutes now before our worship. We're going to take a few minutes now to review some norms for how we want to be together here today. And I've taken these respect guidelines from Eric Law and some of the diversity work that Eric has done and that he uses it in his workshop, and we've taken it here, brought it here with permission, and want to share these. So we work through the word respect, and the R is for take responsibility for what you say without blaming others. So talk from your own perspective. Use I language, I feel, or I think, or I wonder, and without bringing anybody else or blaming anybody else. It'd be really great if we take responsibility for what we say. And E is about empathic or empathetic language or listening. And that has to do with being open to what other people are saying without judging or without evaluating what they're saying, but instead listening and using being curious and open-ended questions to understand more about what that person is saying, getting deeper into the feelings underneath the words. So empathetic listening, curious, open-ended questions. And if we can do that, that's great. And S is be sensitive to different communication styles. So, people use different ways of communicating. Some people are really passive in their communication. They don't really want to rock the boat. And so they might say, I just want to keep the peace, and they don't really say what they need. Some people use that communication style. And there's others who use a very aggressive communication style. They use commands. They speak in such a way that I'm right and you're wrong. That's a aggressive communication style. We can be aware of that too and sit with that. And we can be aware of passive aggressive. So this is people that know what they want, what they need, but they couch it a little bit so they're not too clear in what they're saying. So they might say, well, to when they hear something, well, that's fine, but some people might be angry with that, and that's passive aggressive. It's that they're angry, but they're just couching it a little bit so that they can be a bit passive. And then there's the other communication style of assertive, and that's a person who knows what they need. They use I language to express that need or that feeling, and everyone's pretty clear. They also, an assertive communicator also wants to hear the other person's perspective and work towards a win-win. So there's these different styles, and we can just be aware of those different communication styles. Ponder what you hear and feel before you speak. So if you feel your heart starting to pound, or however you and your body feel some anxiety, and you hear and you've heard this person speak, and you can feel that coming up in you, you say, well, I wonder why I'm feeling that. Let's take a step back and ponder what you hear and feel before you speak. And E, examine your own assumptions and perceptions. It may be that you are feeling, there's an assumption there that is leading you to judge. Examine that. Be curious about yourself. And C, keep confidentiality. So if you've got a story, a real juicy story from somewhere else, and you feel, oh, I really like to share that story, think again, is that story confidential? Is it yours to share? And if you conclude it's not mine to share, then don't share it. share constructively for the well-being of the community. And that's just not us, that's the larger community too. And T is trust one another. We're not here to debate. We're not here to decide who's right or wrong. We're here to support and love each other and to learn from each other and to be curious and open to each other. And so let's just trust that. Let's trust one another as we walk in to this time of sharing. Are there any questions? You can unmute yourself and then what I'm going to do, not seeing it. Oh, and what I want to do is teach you how to raise your hand if you do have a question, and then we'll invite you to speak. So if you look at the bottom of your bar, maybe it's on your bar, you'll see reactions. And if you click on reactions, you'll see the raise hand button. So if we invite you to speak into the circle here this morning or tomorrow, I'll ask you to raise your hand, because what that does, it shoots you right up to the top and we can see you. So and if so it helps us honor you and want to hear. And if you could raise hand button, that would be great. So anybody want to say anything about the respect guidelines? Wonderful. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to go to the reactions button, and I would like you to raise hand if you agree to live into those respect guidelines as much as you possibly can. I got some
I'm having a hard time finding my hand.
So you just go ahead and put up your hand right in your screen there. There you go. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Good. So I'm just going to lower hands, and there you go. Great. Thank you. Well, now we've talked about how we want to be together as we meet. I'm going to turn it over to Dale now to lead us in our opening worship. Dale.
Thank you, Todd. So I invite us to center ourselves here as we've had a chance now to get to know each other a little bit. We've identified some of the parameters and boundaries for our time together. And so I invite us into a time of worship. I invite you just to get comfortable in your chairs, your feet on the floor. Take a big breath if you like, if that helps you to center. And we'll enter into a time of worship. Some of the material for this worship is taken from the 2022 Black History Month worship resources, which are found on the national website. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And we will begin with the lighting of the Christ candle. And I'm going to share my screen here so that you can see some of this. And so we light this candle in the name of the one who guides us into deep waters, who implores us to wade a little farther in, where God is at play, bringing us into good trouble. We seek Christ's presence as we light this candle. And Todd is going to read the dark print, but I invite you all to respond with the dark print with yourselves muted. And this is our call to worship. We come to worship today determined to follow the Christ,
who calls us to a new understanding of fishing.
We come to worship with open hearts and minds,
and a soul ablaze for justice and equality.
We come to meet God and each other.
Let us meet together in love and understanding.
And our scripture for today is taken from James 2, 1-4. And I have asked Rob if he would read this for us.
My brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, must not show favoritism. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, "Here's a good seat for you," but say to the poor man, "You stand there or sit on the floor by my feet," have you not discriminated against yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts?
Thank you, Rob. So this short story is about where people get seated in a meeting. And we assume it was some kind of worship service. The text doesn't really say it. Maybe it was a finance committee meeting. Maybe it was a congregational meeting. Who knows? It's a text about how we make decisions based on first impressions. And so the man who was dressed properly for church was given a good seat. Maybe it was a seat in the front row. Good sight lines for both him and also for the congregation. The man looked good on them, and maybe he even looked like them. The person who was wearing shabby clothes in need of laundering is offered a standing room only position. It wouldn't have been in the front of the room, probably off to the side, maybe to the back, or maybe, as the text suggests, sitting on the floor, out of the sight lines. The key conclusion I take from this text is the observation that by deciding who gets the good seat and who gets the cheap seat, who gets prominence and who gets diminished, these believers have, as the text says, become judges. Now, judge is sort of one of those slippery words in the English language. It's a verb and a noun. And the nouns we leave mostly for those who wear the robes and are appointed. The verb generally has some negative connotations. I feel judged by you. I think you're judging someone. Although we do talk about good judgment as a positive attribute. Judging people by their economic status or their physical appearance here is associated with evil thoughts. That's strong language. And as we explore bias and equity today and tomorrow, I hope that we will be open to new insights about ourselves, about our biases, and how we as pastoral relations liaisons can provide guidance and leadership in our communities of faith to promote equity and, shall we say, good judgment. Let us pray. God of love, we come today celebrating Black History Month. We come today with open hearts and minds to deepen our understanding of and commitment to equity and justice. As we gather, we ask you to come to us now as your Son came to those first disciples on the lakeshore, calling them into a beloved community of love and justice. We pray for your Spirit's presence, calling us to the same. Speak your peace and understanding to our hearts. Reveal yourself to us as we seek ways to work together. May our time together over these next 2 days be infused with your Spirit, that we may boldly walk into new paths, move into areas that may cause discomfort, and lead us into new understandings of self and others. May we become instruments for equity as pastoral relations liaisons and regional council staff, that our communities of faith will be open to all the gifts of every minister, regardless of race, gender identity, accent, sexual orientation, ability, or disability. We pray that our conversations will be filled with wonder, respect, curiosity, and love. Bless our time together. Amen. I now invite Todd to lead us into the next part of our training.
Thank you, Dale. And I don't know if folks, if you know how to say thank you by waving your fingers, this is how I say thank you for that worship. So thank you so much for that time. Great start. Great start. So I'm just going to share. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about the Equity Goal Research Project that happened in Shining Waters. And so our friends in Canadian Shield Regional Council have also were sent the report a little while back, and so they're aware of it as well. So I'm just going to share a screen, and we're going to spend some time, because what I want to talk to you about it, and because it has to do with liaisons as well. So we had this, an invitation back about a year and a half ago from the Equity Committee of Shining Waters. They said, we would like you, Pastoral Relations Commission, to set some equity goals. And when we brought that request to them, to the members of the Pastoral Relations Commission, they all looked at each other and went, well, we don't know where there's inequities happening within the regional council. We may know a little bit of anecdotally, but we don't have anything really systematic to understand where equity seeking ministers are experiencing inequity in our search processes. And so the commission decided that it wanted to examine our pastoral relations policies and procedures through an equity lens. They really wanted to know how racist, sexist, ableist bias has impacted ministry personnel who are searching. And they really wanted to know if that was still impacting their pastoral relationships within Shining Waters Council, Regional Council. And so in June 2021, our researcher, Marcy Gibson, came to us after an extensive research project, listening to search teams, listening to liaisons, listening to ministry personnel who were called or appointed within the Regional Council since 2019, did an extensive research project. And what I want to do this morning is to share with you some of the main themes that connect to the liaison and your ministry. And for those of you in Canadian Shield, you might have a yeah, I kind of get that in my context too. We'll see. But I want us all to be aware of some of the findings of this research project. So there are themes that emerged from the research project. The first theme was crucial role. And that means that pastoral relations liaisons have a crucial and important and an appreciated role in promoting equity within our search processes. So here's some of the things that the search team said. They reported, and this is just some, we would not have managed without our liaison's support. And another, the liaison provided excellent equity training, drawing our attention to bias. So the first thing I want you to hear as pastoral relations liaison is appreciation. You have an absolutely crucial role. Your ministry is so incredibly important in supporting an anti-racist perspective, and helping search teams be aware of bias in themselves and mitigate that, so that all have a opportunity. The skills and gifts of a ministry personnel are considered first. You have brought that gift to those search teams, and we want to just express such appreciation for you. So the second theme that came out of the research was an equity monitor. We heard from you, and we heard from some of the ministry personnel that that with this new pastoral relations process, with the liaison doing the training pieces, but the search team going forward and doing their own work without any presence from the larger church. We heard that in some cases, ministry personnel who were interviewed did experience inequity, did experience some inappropriate questions. And so and that's not just Shining Waters, that would be anywhere. And so one of the recommendations from the researcher was to have a search team member be appointed as an equity monitor. And this person's work is to encourage, remind, and monitor the search team's work through an equity lens. Now, how we do that is still the work of the Pastoral Relations Commission, but I want to give you a sense of what might be coming down the pike to improve, enhance our equity work within the regional council. Another major theme was revisiting equity. The researcher talked about that at the time of the equity training with the search team, to encourage you as liaisons to, whether it's formally or informally, to revisit major themes around equity with that search team as they go forward. So you do the equity training with them, but then when you have an opportunity, when you're talking with the chair, when you're talking down the road, to take some time to say, just want to check in on equity and how you're doing, and maybe bring some of the themes from your original equity training back. So revisiting equity is another major recommendation. Next, position descriptions. So we heard a lot from ministry personnel who were searching for positions in Shining Waters, that a lot of concerns expressed about position descriptions. And here's Greg Daly, that's wonderful. So they heard a lot about position descriptions, and this is what they said, that position descriptions, we need to give more guidance to writing position descriptions so they focus more on the community of faith's identity rather than the minister's skill set. What was happening in position descriptions is some very subtle bias coming through with sentences like candidate should have, or prospective minister should have good English skills. And that's a quote from a position description. Or be able to write clearly, write and communicate clearly. All of these, when an equity-seeking minister reads comments and position descriptions like that, they hear that as, you don't want somebody with an accent. You don't want somebody for whom English is their second language. And so what the research project encourages us to look seriously at those position descriptions and focus more on the community of faith identity rather than the minister's skill set. Next, another major theme from the report, communication ties. Right now, you as Pastoral Relations Liaison, basically you talk to Todd, Dale, and Rob. If you have a question, you talk to us. If you have a concern, you talk to us. If you have a bit of feedback, you talk to us. And one of the things that the researcher heard was that the Pastoral Relations Commission was pretty much locked out of that communication loop, that they have the primary responsibility for equity and growing equity within the regional council, but they pretty much do not hear from the liaisons and the concerns that you may have. And so the researcher made this recommendation to give pastoral relations liaisons an opportunity to speak directly with the Pastoral Relations Commission about equity and what they're experiencing. How that will happen, we'll see down the road, but that was a major theme. And finally, and that little star beside major doesn't mean that this is the most important theme. It's just to tell me that this is the last theme. So the last theme is team diversity. We heard from equity seeking ministers that they were surprised. The search team that they met with was all white, and in one case over 70. But when they were called to that congregation, they discovered much more diversity within that congregation. And so one of the things that the researcher said is, how can we encourage communities of faith to appoint search team members that reflect the diversity of the congregation? And that is a equity building a move for any congregation. If your congregation's all white and over 70, so be it. But if it's not, how can we encourage communities of faith to reflect the diversity of age, sexual orientation, race? How can we help congregations express themselves in their search team and the diversity that's there? That's one of the major themes. Now, I just want to open it up, and you can use your raise hand if you have any questions or comments about some of those themes. Does anybody have any comments that they'd like to make? Yes, Sander, you unmute yourself and go right ahead.
The last one kind of struck me because it's the governing, if I understand correctly, it's the governing body of the community of faith that appoints the search team. And so I wonder if some of that lack of diversity in a search team comes from perhaps a lack of diversity in the church leadership. Just a pondering.
It's a great pondering. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. Okay, and Dan.
Yeah, in one that I recently worked with, I did send them back, as it were, to try and do some more diversity. And I know the congregation somewhat, and was surprised when the answer was that they'd rattled the cages and tried to get more people onto the committee and more diversity. So I was wondering whether, in fact, there's systems in place within the congregation that disempower people. That diversity, basically saying to people in a systemic way, you're not wanted on this, that discourages people from actually stepping forward and claiming a place on something like a search committee.
Thank you, Dan. It's a great comment. Thank you. Any other comments? Yeah, Siddiqui. Oh, Siddiqui and then Gail. Siddiqui?
And there's quite a bit of assumption in the issue of having a diverse congregation, which is connected to what Dan mentioned earlier, which is that because there are a diverse number of people in the congregation doesn't mean that they necessarily feel welcome enough to participate in a process like this. So you will have a variety of people there, but that doesn't necessarily mean they feel like they belong. And therefore, if they're asked to serve in that way, they may not necessarily say yes either. Yeah. And it can also send a not necessarily a true reflection of the congregation. Because if I see that diversity, I assume that those people feel like they belong. And then I come into that space and discover that it's not exactly, that there is still one set of people who dominate. So it does also give almost like an untrue reflection of the congregation and how it functions.
Thank you. That's a great observation. Yeah. I remember when I was interviewed for Thornhill United Church when I served there, and half the search committee were under 30, but boy, I didn't even see them when I arrived there. They were gone. Like, where'd they go? Where'd you go, under 30s? I thought this was a young congregation. Anyway, thank you, Sadiq. I appreciate that. Gail.
So when I asked the group to introduce themselves, I say, what constituency in your church do you represent when they introduce themselves, to try and get a feel for, what might be missing. Because I too have been, in a situation where there were a group of all white women and there were no men in the team. So I was looking for men and youth in that particular group. I'm wondering if, as liaisons, we don't need to know not only who the search team and the chair of that team is, but who's the chair of the board. Because I think somebody just mentioned that sometimes the search team is always appointed by the board. So sometimes I think you need, as a liaison, to get in touch with that board chair and say, did you have power to add to that team? And, I see that you're missing representation from A, B, and C. And so sometimes it's helpful to be able to have that direct communication at the board level in order to get the degree of diversity that you're really looking for in the team.
Thank you. Thanks, Gail. Appreciate that sharing. Thank you. And Isla.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the way you've put these major themes so succinctly, because in my work with a number of churches as a liaison, I could relate to each and every one of these, and more particularly more recently, because of being much more aware of equity. Not that I wasn't aware before, but it's just more visible. And the equity monitor, I found that I was sort of that, because I was involved with the particular communities of faith in a lot of their meetings, and I could be a part of their conversation. And that was really helpful. And that also went back to doing on the spot retraining biases and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the way you've put this, because those are all the things that I can identify as working as a liaison.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Isla. Appreciate that. And Lynella Reed-James.
I just noted 2 quick comments. One is that we still have to keep in mind that a number of our pastoral charges do have or still have people in control of their processes, and who will say, Todd, you are on the committee, but Lynella, you're not. Whether directly or indirectly, it's done. And so we have to fight that, fighting in commas. And so my question has been in my head and to everybody since we started this equity thing, is how do we get this message down to the grassroots? Because unless those people are, the people in the pews, are aware, more aware, and know that they have the power and the influence and everything else we need to change things, I don't know.
Appreciate that. It's a great question, and it's a perennial question. I know when I served Thornhill, there was a large Filipino community that worshiped at Thornhill. And but because of the power structure of the congregation, they said no to overtures to include in leadership. And I think that was something to do with systemic and the feeling where they were feeling about how they were seen in the congregation. Yeah, I could not get to the bottom of it. I struggled, but I couldn't. Yeah, Janet.
I just wanted to mention also, I have experienced in formation of search teams, the power people of the church usually jump in and take the lead in that, forming that committee. But I also like the idea of the monitor. I think that's an excellent idea and one that I'll make sure I use.
It's wonderful. One of our people here, one of our liaisons, Will Houghton. Will, can you just make yourself visible and give everyone a shake? There he is down at the bottom there. Will is a member of the Equity Task Group that's guiding the Pastoral Relations Commission to go through this report and put a plan together. And so Will, I'm really glad that Will's here to listen, to hear your responses, and to take them forward to the Equity Task Group going forward. So thank you, Janet, for your comments. We appreciate it. And Sylvia.
I like that too, and I think the value of the monitor being part of the in the search team itself, so that impetus comes from one of them. It's not from outside, but it's in the group. I mean, it's sort of obvious, but that's much more effective when it comes from the group itself than it is from someone from the liaison who's, from the outside.
Sylvia, that's a really great point. Like you think sometimes something is said in a search group, and because of wanting to save face or not upset the cart or whatever, that person who heard that and went, ooh, doesn't feel empowered. But an equity monitor, I can see that an equity monitor is empowered, first of all, but also somebody who isn't feeling so able or empowered could go to that equity monitor and say, did you hear that? Did I hear that right? And can have an ally in that equity monitor if that equity monitor didn't pick it up. So to have somebody set and ready to comment or empowered to raise that is I think it's an excellent idea. Thank you. Hey, Will, go ahead, Will.
Yeah, just I'm interested in listening to folks talk about different the dynamics that they've experienced in congregations, of who tends to take on these roles kind of over and over within congregations. And when I think of it in relation to the search process, obviously any of these dynamics which exclude people, which exclude gifts that are within our congregations from important processes like this, weaken the effectiveness of the project. And by the time we get to the selection of a committee or nominations, I don't want to say it's too late, but there's a sense in which the challenges that come up in this particular process reflect weaknesses that are present within our congregations in a long-standing way. And so I was just wanting to put in a plug at this point, speaking to myself, but to all of us. I mean, we are all participants in congregations ourselves outside of our liaison role. And I think we can all do our own congregations a big favor if just in our ongoing life, we start kind of raising this from whatever leadership capability that we have, so that, we can start to, as much as possible, heal these systems so that they are healthier when we come to appointing search committees and, you know, the next search committee that happens within our own church, say.
That's a great point. So let's do some work ahead of time in our own context. Is what I'm hearing you say, because that'll bring wonderful gifts down the road. Will, could I ask you to put your email address into the chat and for people? And folks, if you have anything that you'd like to bring Will, knowing that he's on this equity task group, that you'd like to reflect with him on, please, he is one of your fellow liaisons. Let him know your thoughts. Canadian Shield, you too, please. That's not just Shining Waters. Let us know, because we're going to be charting some courses for our equity work as a commission, and we'll be reporting that and letting Rob know as well. And so we really appreciate all of our comments today. Thank you so much. And I think that we're going to close out this part of our discussion on the equity project and the equity goal project. And I'm going to turn it over to Rob now to start us into thinking of what's the difference between equity and equality. So Rob, thank you so much.
Thanks, Todd, for getting us started on that. I don't like looking at myself, so just a minute here. So what we want to start by just wrestling with those two words, equity and equality. What is the difference between them? And I think you folks have been working on that for a while. We've been working on it. Simply, equity and equality, though similar, cannot be used interchangeably. Despite being both nouns and forms from the same root word, equity and equality have divergent meanings. Equity is the concept of providing different resources or accommodations in order to create just circumstances within a group. Equity is concerned with the concept of fairness. Equality is a distribution of the same resources of accommodations within a group. Equality concerns with the concept of sameness. For example, ensuring equality in a group would mean all members get the resources they need to reach a goal. Ensuring quality in a group would mean all members would get the same resources. So I just think it's important to have a definition of what we're talking about here. And I'm sure I'm using some resources from the diversity workshop from Fresh Start. And I think that's a good place to start. And I always think that that's probably a good place. For me, one of the issues as we were struggling with that is that we might do all of our part to make sure that we have equity, we are paying attention to equity. But one of the things we've just sort of been alluding is that our churches may not necessarily be safe places for racialized or unable, sorry, that's the wrong word, but for some of these folks, I know, as a gay man, we've been allowing gay ministers to be ordained since 1988. Well, not a lot of those churches were ready to accept gay men, gay ministers or queer ministers. In fact, when I was settled, the church that I was settled at refused to take me. And that was 2000 and when was I ordained? 2007. So that's only 15 years ago. So anyways, I just want to show a bit of the resource from the diversity workshop from Fresh Start. I think that this particular cartoon kind of shows really the difference between equality and equity. For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And so for some, that might be an easy task to do, the monkey perhaps, but for the elephant, it might be slightly different. And then I imagine that you're all familiar with this. Equality is that we all have a box, and And so some of us standing on our box can see the baseball game. Equity would make sure that the boxes were distributed so that we could all take a look at the game. So I'm just going to show, I'm just going to stop that and share just a quick little video that kind of takes that a little further. So just one moment.
Equality and equity. You've probably heard those words a lot lately, but how are they different? Equality is treating everyone the same way. While it's great in principle, it only works if everyone is on the same playing field to start. There are so many factors that could create an unequal playing field. Historically speaking, there are systems that have been put in place to deny people access to some of the same resources other people have, whether these are related to race, gender, economic status, or sexual orientation. So if equality isn't sufficient, how do we help people? That's where equity comes in. Equity ensures that all people have access to the resources they need to be successful. It's about recognizing that not only is every person different, but their environment is different as well. So each person needs different resources to succeed. Inequity exists all around our society. Healthcare, politics, and education are just a few places. The first step is to recognize them and develop solutions that address not only the inequities, but the systematic barrier creating them. That's how we create a more equitable world.
Okay. So that just gives us a little kind of glimpse into defining the words equity and equality. And so the question we want to wrestle with for a few moments this morning is, why is equity important in our pastoral relationship searches? And so, and this is where I'm hoping you will help me with that. I have some ideas, but I think probably, so why is this important? I've already, one of the questions I raised when I was working with Todd and Dale was, what if our church is mostly white? What's the purpose of reaching out to different people? So that's sort of what I'm asking the question. Why are we interested in equity? Thank you, Sylvia.
So I would say that you miss the richness that is in a community where people have different perspectives, or they have different abilities, or they have different experiences, which can, I don't want to use the word enrich, but it can enlarge the view, or it can be an enlarging force in a community if you look for the differences. Sounds kind of trite, but that's how I see it. You miss out if you don't, well, I won't even repeat myself anymore.
No, thanks, Sylvia. And Greg.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Sylvia's comments. I think that that was really well expressed. There are two elements to that. I mean, one, the lack of diversity in our churches reflects an inability for our churches to engage the reality of the world around, because that's just not what our country is. So we're not responding to the communities in which we live and listening or hearing from the communities in which we live. And in the pastoral relations process, in the pastoral liaison process, that says to me as well that if we're only drawing from that subset, even if that's what our churches are, then in that liaison process, we need to be asking ourselves the question, are we missing people at this table? Which is a bit of the discussion we were having earlier around who we choose to be on search teams. But that might mean that the liaison's responsibility is to prod the search team as to who within the congregation might be reflective of voices that haven't traditionally been heard. And I think that brings us to start at least talking about equity or the lack thereof within our context.
Thanks, Greg. Sadique.
I just thought of the fact that the process of call in any congregation, they want, even if they don't know it, they want someone who has the capacity to respond and connect with the issues on the ground, connect with the congregation and connect with the community. And so choosing a minister with that kind of skill set requires removing all the things that are quote unquote irrelevant and paying attention to the skill sets that are before you that you need to do the ministry that you're called to do. So for me, being able to speak clearly is really not a requirement for connecting with the community. It isn't, because there are many ways to do that. So in my mind, to be equitable is to base the criteria for selection on the things that matter about doing the overall work and not on the superficial self-serving things that we would like to have.
Thank you. Thank you. Very well said. And just so you know, Todd is writing these down. We're going to return to them tomorrow. And as we go into a practice training session. So that's what Todd's doing. So thank you. Daniel.
In our new incarnation in our system, I think it's enabled churches to become more, we've become more congregationalist, and I think congregations are de facto a little bit more insulated. So the pastoral liaison process, the search for new ministers, is one of the big touch points for the broader church to have input into the congregation, I think, and have be a little bit of yeast in the loaf, as it were. And I think congregations often become very insulated and a certain amount satisfied with where they are. And that tends to be in a place that is often inequitable because, as we've noted, most of our congregations are older and white. So I think this is it's a really important opportunity to sort of do a bit of prodding there. Because as Greg noticed, even though our congregations might find themselves quite monolithic in their composition, they don't live in a monolithic culture. And if they're going to be relevant to the community, they have to get out of that. So the process is a really good prodding point, I think, to challenge some of that. Also noting that maybe that prodding is not going to be very welcomed.
Thanks, Daniel. Any other thoughts of why this is important? Thank you again, Sylvia.
Well, yes, I'm just kind of responding to what Daniel said there about people living in a monolithic culture, and they don't really live, but they see themselves that way. They see themselves that way because, if you live where I live in Northern Ontario, yes, they're out there. There's a great variety of people, but in their churches, it's pretty monolithic, with a few people perhaps there that are different. But it's hard to persuade people that they don't live in a monolithic culture. So I just point that out. It's from my experience.
Thanks, Sylvia. In my work before I joined the regional council, I served a small church in Thunder Bay, and I invited them, and part of our process was to just look at their neighborhood, and they were surprised at who lived in their neighborhood and how their neighborhood did not look anything like who was going to church on a Sunday morning. And that was sort of an eye-opening thing. And I think, and I appreciated what Daniel said about, you know, we the liaisons are sometimes the one connection without presbytery anymore. We're the one connection that churches sometimes have with the larger church. And so, you know, I think it's important for us to remember this, because part of who we are as a United Church is a commitment to being a multicultural church. And so this is one way that we can begin be part of that process as well. And so I think talking about equity and these issues helps us to be more representative of our society and of our neighborhood as well. And so, and really, you know, again, I encourage you to look at the Fresh Start diversity model. You know, it begins, our theology is really one of inclusive and multicolored, multicultural faith. And so I think it is important for us to work on equity issues. So
Rob Stewart has his hand up.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
Oh, look at that. Thanks, Stuart.
Sometimes it's not obvious in a congregation what you have in the pews. I think back to a congregation I served. Everyone looked, to my eyes, white, older, you know, sort of monolithic. But when I probed a little bit deeper and got talking to people, discovered that 30% of them, 30% were First Nations. And that you know, that's a reality where it wasn't visually obvious, but there was an equity issue there that was sort of hidden, if you want.
Okay, Lynella, please.
I thank you, Todd and Rob. I'm just sitting here. My comment is probably not supposed to be at this position, but forgive me. It has bothered me ever since I've been, even before working with the church here, that we also run into the problem of putting people in places just because we need a body from that particular group, whether or not that person is capable, willing, qualified, whatever we want to look. And that's one of my pet peeves. Don't put me to do a job just because I'm Black or just because I'm a woman. Put me there because you think I have what it takes to do the job. And so that has bothered me for some time, and I thought, should I share this?
Thank you. Thank you. I think that gets us started on that conversation. And so thank you for all of your comments. And because you have been so good, and because I need a washroom break, I'm suggesting we take 10 minutes for a little bit of a break and come back at, well, 8 minutes after 11 if you're a legalistic fundamentalist, which I'm not. So I'm going to say 11:10.
Perfect. Perfect, Rob. Good for you. Yes, 10 after 11, everybody. Go grab some coffee and we'll see you back here. Have a good break. Okay, I think we're all back now. Welcome back, everybody. And I hope you've had a good all-purpose break. Just before we broke away, Dan wrote a chat that is responding to Lynella's comment about tokenism. And he says, back in the 80s, I experienced the same tokenism Lynella is speaking of. Every committee in a progressive community had to have someone gay on it. I ended up on things that I had no capacity, interest, or qualifications for. And just as you were coming back in, Will asked if he could just make a comment. So Will, you go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, not a comment, but a question. And there's a short, now I don't see Lynella is not at her computer just at the moment, but, and didn't have to be her answering, but she made the initial comment. Some of you may have followed, like, I don't know if any of you follow US politics, but Joe Biden has a Supreme Court vacancy to fill. And he has said that he's going to appoint a Black woman. And there's a little bit of conversation about the wisdom of what he said with that vow. On the one hand, I'm sure the vast majority of people want to have that kind of representation on their court. On the other hand, does his saying that publicly saddle the next person who gets that appointment as not the best person, but as the token? And there's a tension there. And, and I'm just, Lynella made a comment and Dan's made a comment. And on the one hand, when there are barriers, we need explicit measures to overcome those barriers. But on the same token, we don't want people to feel like they've been just a token selection for something. And so I just was interested, based on the two comments, perspectives, ideas about how to resolve that tension, how to get beyond it.
Okay, thank you. And we'll just hear from Siddiqui at this point, and then we'll move on with our program, but there'll be other opportunities. So go ahead, Siddiqui.
Just in relation to tokenism, there is the person who is the quote unquote token. It's a difficult decision to make, to decide if you're a token or not. And so there are two parts to it. First, you have to decide whether your tokenism is going to make a difference. So tokenism is only bad, or being selected for that reason is only bad if your presence is only for presence sake. So we want a gay person on the team, but that gay person does not have the same value of voice or input. So in relation to the US situation, there may be a significant difference to having a Black woman on that team. And so that's the issue that needs to be worked through. I don't volunteer. People ask, I've been asked to serve on many things that I know, obviously, because they want a Black person to be present. I only go to the ones that I feel I could make a difference and I feel I have the skill set to do. But I do recognize in many instances, I am going to be the only, because that's the context in which we are.
Thank you, Siddiqui. I really appreciate you bringing your voice. And yes, thank you. I'm going to do my fingers for you and for Dan and for Lynella and Will for that conversation on tokenism. I really appreciate that. So we're going to be moving into a workshop now. So back in October, I had an opportunity to participate in a workshop, a diversity workshop, the 40 Days for Racial Justice. And it was an awesome time. It was an absolutely awesome workshop. A fellow named Bill Miller did it. And I learned a lot. And I wanted us to experience that workshop. And with the magic of technology, I can bring you this workshop and we're all going to participate in it. So it's really fun. So I found it so helpful, and we're going to begin our time now for the next hour. We're going to participate in this workshop, and I'm going to begin by sharing my screen and make sure I share the sound so we can all hear it. And I want to begin with Adele Holliday, our Equity, Anti-Racism and Equity Officer from the General Counsel Office, to introduce our workshop leader at this point, Bill Miller. And so everyone, can you all see Adele? Put up your thumbs and tell me yes. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to press play now and we'll listen. And Rob, I can see you. So if you can tell me if you can hear the sound with the thumbs up, that would really help me. Okay, so here's Adele introducing our workshop leader.
Without further ado, please allow me to introduce Bill, who will lead us in conversation today. So Bill Miller is the host of the podcast series Open Out, and it's about the nitty-gritty of intercultural ministries. This series grew out of research funded by the McGeechee Scholarship and Bill's years of ministry at Knox United Church in Winnipeg. Bill is also part of the Forum for Intercultural Leadership and Learning and the Western Intercultural Ministry Network. So welcome to Bill, and over to you.
Okay, so that gives you an introduction to Bill and where he is coming from. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to move into a 7-minute talk by Bill, and then at the end we're going to move into breakout rooms with the original 4 people you got to know earlier.
Hi, welcome. My name's Bill Miller. I'm coming to you in video format because I have to go in for surgery in a few hours. Some of the nice doctors in Winnipeg are going to rearrange my nose somewhat after an accident I had about a year ago. It's an interesting thing. I look forward to being on the other side of that so that I can breathe properly. But the actual change process in which that actual moment of moving my nose back over, I'm not looking forward to it very much. Change is kind of like that a lot of the times. That the post-change experience, that's desirable, but change itself, it can be a little difficult. That's part of the reason why my day in these 40 days is called the day of inaction. It's a time for inaction, but mostly it's a time for inaction. That's where we need to deal with the deep stuff around racism, the deep stuff around ethnocentrism, the deep stuff that gets in the way. If we're to be a reliable ally, then we need to do our work, deep work, in order to prepare ourselves. So I want to start with a few wee exercises to involve you in. I didn't invent any of these, so you may be familiar with one or perhaps even all of them. But we'll try anyways. After each of these, I'll give you a few seconds for you to do some thinking, and after that we'll break into groups. The first one is called the surgeon's dilemma. A father and his son are involved in a terrible car crash. The man died at the scene. The child was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance, and when the child arrived at the hospital, was rushed into the operating theater, the surgeon pulled away and said, "I can't operate on this boy. He's my son." How is that possible? The second one, call it what's in a name. Now, until the 1970s, and if you're old like me, some of you will remember this, hurricanes were given only female names. But since the mid-70s, the names have alternated between male and female names going up the alphabet. So Anna, Bob, Carol, Daryl. Researchers, when they removed catastrophic scale hurricanes, studied death rates in hurricanes with female names compared to those with male names. And they found that the death rates in hurricanes with female names was twice that of those with male names. Why? What's going on? And the third one I've called what's height got to do with it? As it turns out, I should offer a little rider on this. It's a very sensitive subject to me. I'm about 5'7.5", though I always pretend I'm 5'8". Anyways, less than 15% of American males are over 6 foot. Yet fully 60% of male corporate CEOs are over 6 foot. Less than 4% of American males are over 6'2", and yet 36% of the male CEOs are. Why? What's going on? Now, through the magic of the wizards who know how to do such things, you will be broken into groups of 4 or 5 people. And there you'll have about 6 or maybe 7 minutes to chat. And I invite you during that time to share your ideas about what's happening in each of these 3 exercises. Now, if you happen to be familiar with any of them and you know the answer, I invite you just to hold back for a bit. Let the others chat. Let them suffer. And then offer your idea, your answer. And then, if as a group you have had a chance to look at what the answers are and see what's going on, ask yourself, what is going on underneath all of this that could create this kind of stuff, this kind of experience in humans? Enjoy your groups. I hope it goes well.
Wonderful. Okay, that's our first talk, and we're going to put you into your groups. Rob right now is putting in the 3 scenarios into the chat so you can refer to them in your groups and talk about these 3 scenarios. And just to reiterate what Bill said, if you know the answer to these, maybe just hold back and let the others struggle, and then you can bring in your thoughts on them. Any questions before we head into our small groups to discuss these 3 scenarios and what's going on here? Okay, we're all good. You're going to have 7 minutes, so make sure everyone has a chance to talk, but have a great time with each other, having a good chew over these 3 scenarios. What's going on? All right, Dale, do your magic. Welcome back. Here we are. Well, we're going to go back to Bill, and he's going to unpack this. I hope you had a fun conversation trying to figure out those scenarios, and we're going to go back to Bill. He's going to unpack it a little bit for us, and then he's going to open us to discover a little bit more about our unconscious biases that we all hold. So going back to Bill now.
Hi, welcome back. I hope you had enjoyable discussions. Let's look quickly at those exercises. So, in this terrible accident, the boy's father was killed and he was rushed to the hospital where the surgeon couldn't operate because she was his mother. Now, the surgeon is the mother, female. Now, I didn't get that when I first looked at this riddle, and I was totally embarrassed. I mean, I've been married for 43 years to a very strong feminist, and I've always considered myself to be an ally and have an open mind, and still I didn't get it. Why, I wonder? Now, in that second example of hurricanes with female names, well, you might think, well, maybe it's because the Meteorological Society gives worse names to females. No, it's not it. They're decided years in advance. It's random. The reason is because when people heard that a hurricane with a female name was coming, they didn't prepare. They didn't consider that it would be as dangerous, as violent as one with a male name. They also found that the death rate increased depending on the perceived femininity of the name. So people didn't prepare as much for a Hurricane Tiffany. There's an implicit assumption in our minds of female with something less violent, less dangerous. And the third, what's height got to do with it? Well, that's something called height bias. Researchers have found, and I find this to be a dismal finding, that there is no society on earth that shows a preference for shorter males. I find that to be unacceptable, but apparently it's true. There seems to be something in the architecture of our brain that associates height with competency, with strength, perhaps as a warrior. Now, it's absurd to do that, but these are all forms of what's called implicit or unconscious bias. These are patterns in our mind that exist, and they don't work through the thinking part of our brain. They happen automatically. It has to do with perception. You see, researchers have found, and I have no idea how they did this, that we are exposed at any given moment to about 11 million pieces of information. And our brains, our thinking part, can only deal with 40. So that means we have to whittle everything down, simplify it, and that's where unconscious or implicit bias comes in. Now, let me give you another couple of examples around perception. First, check out these two tables. Are they the same size and shape or different? Are the tabletops the same or are they different? Have a look. Odd, isn't it? What our brains are doing is they're not perceiving what's right in front of us. They're perceiving what they think they see right in front of us, what they expect to see right in front of us. And that matters. Here's another example. Take a look at these two faces and see if one has a lighter skin tone than the other. These two faces were actually computer generated and they emit the same amount of light. Exactly. Yet in our minds, we tend to perceive the one that looks a little more Caucasian as lighter. It has to do with expectation, not with perception, not with what we're seeing. This is all part of the way bias works in our brains. Remember that all that information coming in, and we have to have shortcuts in order to process this. And we needed it for evolutionary purposes. We need, you see, the thinking part of our brain, the part of us that does what we think of as thinking, is the prefrontal cortex. It's kind of up here in this area of the brain. It's very good to have it. It allows us to know that we are thinking, metacognition, those kind of things. But its computing power is limited, and it's quite slow in its processing, and we need to be able to move quickly. We need to be able to rely on automatic purposes. If every time a child darted in front of your car when you're driving, you had to have a conversation with your prefrontal cortex, now I remember, what is it that I should do? What's the rational choice to do when a child is darting in front of my car? Oh yes, I should put on the brakes. Well, at that time, it's too late. We have to move immediately. And that grew out of our evolutionary past, where if we saw something that we thought was attacking us, and we thought it might be, I don't know, a saber-toothed tiger, we run, or we take our spears, or whatever we do. Now, if we happen to find out that it's just a visiting chieftain who's wearing a saber-toothed tiger coat, no problem. A false positive is safer than a false negative. And so we needed to be able to move quickly, and that thinking part of our brain doesn't work. Now, much of what underlies racism occurs in these other areas of our brain. That doesn't excuse it. It just means that's where we need to try to work. Trying to work only with the frontal areas of our brain won't help us. If you haven't read much or explored much around the theme of unconscious or implicit bias, I encourage you to Google it. You'll find there's a whole bunch of things that are in there that are quite fascinating. One that doesn't relate in anything to what we're talking about, but is one of my favorites because it had totally explained my experience through the years. Is called, what's it called? Something like time bias. And what that means is that there's a tendency for humans to underestimate by about half how long it will take them to do a task, but to pretty accurately estimate how long it will take somebody else to do it. Well, that's always what happens to me. I'd be saying, oh, I can get that done within a couple of hours, and like 4 or 5 hours later, I was still working on it. Anyways, there's a whole bunch of these. Have a look at them, and I think you'll find them very rich for helping that internal process of change that's so essential. You see, bias is universal. We all have them. Throughout all of the world, we have them. The interesting thing is that although they're ubiquitous, that everybody has them, they're quite malleable. They do tend to change quite quickly. As soon as we know about height bias, we're much less likely to follow it. When they become conscious, they tend to lose their power, their strength. Privilege is not ubiquitous. Some people have it and some people don't. In fact, the only way you can have privilege is if somebody else doesn't. Now, when bias and privilege come together, then we have problems. It's then that racism can begin to develop, to grow. Privilege is the external expression of this. Entitlement is the internal way. So we are given privilege by the external world. That creates within us, or can create within us, an internal entitlement. Now, you can't change privilege very much. I guess you could, but generally speaking, it's a given. What you do with your privilege, if you have it, that's what matters. Here's a few examples. Do you often think about your race, what race you are? If you don't, well, you probably have privilege. Because most people who experience racial discrimination do think about it. If every time you get stopped by a cop, you don't wonder if he stopped you because of your racial identity, well, you probably have privilege, because the experience of others causes them to think, well, maybe he stopped me because I'm Black, or because I'm Indigenous, or because I am whatever. You might not be able to change privilege per se, but you can change entitlement, and that's a part of the work. To disentangle yourself from entitlement is one way to begin to disarm this toxic mix that can occur. Now, my approach, like different people are different ways, right? But my approach is I tend to not get very hung up on words. Some people would use racism as a kind of a personal construct. It's something that individuals have. They can have a racist attitude towards somebody else. Academics and many progressives tend to use it as a structural thing. It's about society. It's about having power and all of that. Now that tends to be how I use it. So for me, if you are a member of the underclass, if you are part of an oppressed minority, my experience, worked in deaf ministry for a long time. You could be deaf and you could have racial prejudice, but you couldn't have racism because you tend to be excluded from power. If you were indigenous, if you are black, if you are racialized, that's how I would do it because it links with power. But other people have a more personal definition. It doesn't really matter. There's an interesting book. I happen to have it right here. I will be reading it in the waiting room. Although I don't know if holding it up, that will be, it will be backwards. I hope not. Anyways, it's called Caste, and it's by Isabel Wilkerson. You might have read it. Now, her thesis is that she believes that in America, and I would suggest also in Canada, that what we really have is a caste system. And that members who are in the lower caste tend to be folk who are racialized, and there is often a hierarchy there. And so you could have that in America, being black is here, being Latino or Latinx is here, and so forth. In Canada, indigenous, black, up, and so. But she sees the structure, the mental structure and the social structure as being similar to a caste system. Interesting to explore. We have the hardwired brain structure that we have, and we have to make the best of it. It's helpful much of the time, but there's a few things to note. One is that little amygdala, that flight, fight, fear mechanism, it's a little trigger happy. Like, it doesn't take much for it to flare up. And as soon as it flares up, it sends, adrenaline throughout the whole of the body, and we aren't able then. And as soon as that happens, then we can't confront that part of our brain. That the prefrontal cortex goes, okay, I'm shutting my doors. I'm putting up some boards on right now because we're in some sort of danger here. So disarming that fear mechanism is really important. What has helped you disarm fear in the past? Can you think of times that you have gone through some sort of a change in perception? Take, for example, with the changing demographics in our society, I can remember a time when if I went somewhere and I heard people all around me speaking a language that I didn't know, or different languages that I didn't know, I would feel some sort of anxiety inside me. That's also a kind of a bias. It's in-group bias and a series of things. We don't need to go into all of the details here, but I would have a kind of an anxious response. Then after a time of working, I worked at Knox, Winnipeg, which is a in a very, very culturally diverse neighborhood and is a highly intercultural community of faith. I noticed that if I would go to Superstore, the supermarket where I attended in that neighborhood, repeatedly, all around you, people would be speaking different languages. And at a certain point I noticed, and I would have a great sense of gratitude within me. Oh, isn't it wonderful to live in this country? So instead, what happened is the experience was the same, the data was the same, but something had changed inside me. Well, what is it that can equip us to make those kind of changes? What helps us change? So I'm going to invite you to break into groups. Again, we'll consult the wizards to get them to do that. And to talk for a few minutes, if you will, about implicit bias, unconscious bias. Is that something new for you? And about bias and privilege and entitlement, how they might work together, how you've seen them working together. And then, if you have enough time, also just do some talking about what it is that has helped you change, what has helped you to overcome or reframe a perception in order that fear doesn't get in the way for you. Enjoy your conversations.
I'm just going to pause on the screen, folks, for you to really have a good look at it. So unconscious bias leads to generalizations and stereotypes. Racial stereotypes plus negative equals racial prejudice. Racial prejudice plus privilege, entitlement, power equals racism. These are these little equations that Bill was alluding to in his talk. And as we move you into it, we're going to give you a bit more time this time to spend talking about these equations. Rob is busy putting these into the chat box so that you can access them during your conversation. But what has helped you change your perceptions of those who are somehow different from you? So you may have had experience like Bill, where he was amongst some people who were speaking different languages and felt anxiety and fear. And then he talked about an experience later in his life when he was amongst people speaking many languages and he experienced a great sense of gratitude. Have you experienced that? Has something shifted in you? So we're going to put you back into your small groups. You have those things in the chat box to refer to. And just before we go, Dale, I'm just going to give everyone a good sense. You're going to have 16 minutes. 16 minutes. So that gives you, each of you, at least 4 minutes to speak on this. And the question, what has changed your perception of those who are somehow different than you? So over to you, Dale, to get us into small groups. So welcome back, everybody. And we're going to continue on now with Bill Miller, who will, he's going to bring us some bad news and some good news. So I'm going to share my screen now and we'll continue on.
So biases are simply one form of generalization that our brains engage in, mental shortcuts. And that's what stereotypes are. That's why we have them. They actually have an essential function. But when our stereotypes attribute negative qualities to a particular group, then we enter the realm of prejudice. Now, if that group is something we considered to be a race or called a race. I mean, race is a funny construct, but anyways, if that group is a race, then it's racial prejudice. Now add in entitlement, privilege, and power. Yeah, you end up with racism. Biases are ubiquitous. It means everyone has them, but not everyone has the same ones. Some, like planning fallacy, and that's the proper name of the thing I was trying to remember the name of before. Some, like planning fallacy, are just rather quirky. But others are disastrous. They have terrible consequences. In Canada, 30% of the male inmates in our federal prisons are Indigenous. And yet only 5% of the general population is Indigenous. Now, that rate of incarceration is even higher than in the US, where Black males are jailed at more than 5 times the rate of white males. What's going on here? Now, is it because Indigenous folk or African Americans are somehow more innately drawn to crime? No, of course not. Or maybe because being economically disadvantaged, they're more likely to be tempted to enter the realm of crime. Well, poverty, unemployment, housing, discrimination, all of these can have an impact for sure, but that can't explain it. And although we do, of course, have racist cops and we likely have racist judges, most of those incarcerated were likely sentenced by fair-minded people trying to do what was right. So something else is going on then. But what? Now, when I was doing some research, I found this odd finding. researchers in the US found that for male inmates, the darker the skin, the thicker the lips, and the wider the nose, the longer the sentence and the greater the likelihood of receiving the death sentence when compared to African Americans with lighter skin. Now that can't simply be racism. I mean, bigots aren't generally that selective or perhaps that sophisticated. Something else must be going on to contribute to this great injustice. It's likely something related to in-group bias, a very real and unconscious and generally unconscious form of bias. I suspect that in Canada, at least on the prairies, research would show that the stronger the stereotypical Indigenous accent, the longer the sentence. Accent bias is also very real and also generally unconscious. So what do we do with all this? We mustn't somehow excuse racist attitudes and policies by saying they're just part of being human. Well, remember, biases are ubiquitous, yes, but they're also very malleable. We can change them. We can change our minds. That's what metanoia, the Greek word translated repentance in the New Testament, actually means. To change our minds, to change our thinking. Well, okay. So how do we do this? Here's a few of what in my research I found to be helpful, perhaps even essential in the process of changing. One, desire internal change. Recently in the lectionary, we read the story of Bartimaeus, called blind Bartimaeus. Well, what did Jesus ask him? He said, "What is it that you want?" And he replied, "Rabboni," to see again. That's what he wanted. Well, we have to want to see as well if we're going to be able to see. And that means being open to changing, even if it perhaps hurts a bit. Second thing is illumination. Recognize a bias for what it is. Oh, I see. That's what you are. I was thinking that you're strong. I noticed that you're tall. I see what's going on. Then the third thing is to foster compassionate curiosity, or sometimes called compassionate inquiry. Converse with that part of you, the bias or the fear that you're experiencing. Oh, I see what you're doing. You were trying to protect me, to help me. Thank you. But I'm okay now. I won't need you to do that for me now. I'm okay. It sounds bizarre, but it works. It really does help. And in that process, avoid guilting yourself. Avoid self-condemnation. Well, guilt and self-condemnation, these can be momentarily satisfying because once again, our egos are getting the attention that they crave. It's just that in this case, it's negative attention. But ego doesn't care. Positive attention, negative, just be attentive to me. But these processes also are stimulating, and they stimulate the limbic system. And the limbic system, that's the system where the hippocampus and the amygdala and those other parts of our brain operate. And activating them means that we are shutting down our prefrontal cortex part, the thinking part, our reasoning part. And so that combination will limit the efficiency, the efficacy of the change process. Now, by the way, when that system is activated, fear system, that part of us where we feel, oh my gosh, what's going on here? I'm feeling anxious. I don't understand. When you have that kind of an experience, there are some steps that you can take that can really help. You feel that impulse of fear, or perhaps even resentment or judgment. First thing is slow down. Slowing down allows your limbic brain, the amygdala, the hippocampus, to disarm themselves. Okay, I can let go. And then that can allow your prefrontal cortex to reboot, and start up again. You can think. Second, breathe. I know we all need to, if we don't breathe, that's not a good thing, but intentionally breathe. Control your breathing just for a few minutes. I don't exactly know why, but focusing on your breathing can really help in these contexts. And third, simply withhold interpretation. Say, I see stuff that's going on around me. I see what's happening, but I don't have enough information yet to know what it means. And allow yourself simply to be in that ambiguous place. Not running from ambiguity, from not understanding. That's a real start to helping us to avoid the kind of mental pathways that lead us into racist attitudes. Racism becomes a structural system once a whole bunch of us get together and kind of allow our collective fears to gel in a certain direction. Undoing them means we have to undo our fears, and part of our fear can be the fear of losing privilege. I'm going to invite you to break into groups again for a few minutes to give you a chance to talk with one another about bias and privilege and entitlement and what we can do with them as Christians, as people of faith, as we seek to take responsibility for what is ours. Our thinking, our minds, our attitudes. Take a few moments as the wizards recast you into groups.
We're going to put you back into groups, and this time we only have 5 minutes because of the time of the day. So take the 5 minutes to talk about what points can we change in ourselves, and in the series of equations. You remember all those equations? They're still in your chat box. And at what points can we change ourselves? And I would say we change ourselves in the grace and love of God. So take 5 minutes to have a conversation about what points can we change in ourselves in this series of equations that are in your chat box. Okay, Dale, do your thing.
All right. Everyone is back. Todd tells me that is the conclusion of that workshop. So thank you, Todd, for leading us through that. That was really a good time of reflection and thinking led by Bill there. That was great. So friends, it's a couple of minutes before the time when we said we would end part one of our workshop here. And I just have a couple of announcements before we send you out into the rest of your day. So a reminder that we will gather again tomorrow at 9:30. So please arrive in the waiting room a couple of minutes ahead of the time so that we can get started promptly at 9:30. It is the same Zoom link as today. So no new link, you can click on the same link, that's going to work for you. If you have not done your power analysis sheet, which was sent to you prior to today, if you could please do that exercise. It'll only take you a few minutes. If for some reason you've misplaced it, just shoot an email to Donna Roots or myself or Todd or Rob, and we'll make sure you get that. yeah, and we're going to circle back to a lot of the same themes tomorrow when we do a kind of a simulation workshop, and so a lot of these themes that we've been talking about will have a chance to come back again to tomorrow. We'll have a time in the morning to discuss any concerns or questions or thoughts that have arisen out of day one. And so if you have some questions, write them down or make a note, and we'll take a bit of time tomorrow to bring those back. If you have any feedback from day one that you would like us as facilitators to know about, if there was something that didn't work in the small groups, or you noticed something that we need to adjust on the fly, by all means, contact Rob or Todd or myself, and we'll make some adjustments if we need to. So, does anybody have any concerns or questions before I bless us with a closing prayer? Any questions or concerns? Okay. Seeing none, I would like to just close this part of our part one of our meeting with a blessing and a send-off for you. Let's pray. Go now to seek a place in a beloved community where all people are known and acknowledged, where partners and allies are found, where all people work towards love, fairness, and understanding. Go with the hope of Jesus and Martin Luther King that this community is possible and all it needs is you. Go with celebration in your hearts for Black peoples. Go now in peace. Amen. Thank you, folks. You can open up your mics if you want to say goodbye to each other, and we will see you tomorrow at 9:30.